that Javier Becerra said there when he was replying to
Representative
Bill Rackus?
He said there is no medical term like, quote, partial birth abortion. Okay. And that, quote, there is no law that deals specifically with the term partial birth abortion.
All right. So according
which are two different things, by the way. Whether there's a medical term or not has nothing to do with the reality that there is a law that deals very specifically with the term partial birth abortion and is in fact called the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act. But anyway, continue.
So this is the thing. If you go to our friends at Susan B. Anthony list, they quote Representative Gus Bilirakis, "Will you uphold the law banning partial birth abortions?" Secretary Becerra says there is no such law. Then they go on in their very next tweet. They quote him again. "There is no law that deals specifically with the term partial birth abortion." And they link, Susan B. Anthony list links to law.cornell.edu, which is the law library for Cornell Law School.
Yeah.
18 U.S. Code Section 1531. The title of the code, partial birth abortions prohibited.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a very, very clearly, whether you want to have the argument about its use as a medical term of art, clearly it's not really a medical term of art. That doesn't devalue the reality of what it is, the reality of this is a baby that is partially delivered, except for the head. I have some superstitious holdover from Descartes that the pineal gland of the brain is where the soul meets the body or something. I don't know. So, some sort of notion that the brain is the center of the self or somehow. So the baby's not really a baby, even though the baby is halfway out of the mother at this point.
And John, they go on. If Becerra is, I don't want to think that he is this stupid. I think it is just pure mendacity. He says, if you wanted to say, well, look, there's no law that deals with this. If he wants to deny the fact that it is a colloquial term that is used, well, John, in this code, 18 USC 1531, subsection B, it says, as used in this section, subsection 1, the term partial birth abortion means an abortion in which the person performing the abortion, subsection A and B. John, so this is literally in legislation. They have to do definitions.
Right,
it's
exactly.
Like legislating 101. Becerra was in Congress for 30 years.
Yes,
and he's acting like
Becerra himself voted on this piece of legislation.
Multiple times.
Voted against this piece of legislation. So now, this raises two questions. Is Becerra being deliberately obtuse? Yeah, I think he's being deliberately obtuse. I think he's sort of refusing to give the kind of ideological concession or the language concession of admitting that this is partial birth abortion and insisting on calling it only dilation and extraction. So the story goes on. He recommended calling the procedure, quote, dilation and extraction, and defended its use to, quote, protect the health of mothers as a late-term abortion procedure. This is his quote. Perhaps if you were to talk about what you probably know as dilation and extraction, which is a procedure used by OBGYNs like my wife to care for a woman who is having a difficult pregnancy when there's a chance that the fetus will not survive, then we could talk about that, he said. So, which is not which, first of all, there's so many misstatements here. First of all,
using his wife being an OBGYN as a shield behind,
maybe she should be the Secretary of Health and Human Services rather than you. I mean, she has at least some medical background, unlike you, Javier Becerra, who has no public health background. Your only qualifications are you were a member of Congress who voted on stuff, and you were the Attorney General of California, and you sued a bunch of times on behalf of Planned Parenthood.
You lost at the Supreme Court in 2018 when you tried to attack pregnancy centers.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I think, first of all, he's on a little ideological, a sort of PR crusade here to say, well, late-term abortions are necessary to care for a woman who is having a difficult pregnancy where there's a chance that the fetus will not survive. Okay, so first of all, the partial birth abortion ban is not attacking the ability of people to, for example, remove a child in the case of an ectopic pregnancy. The partial birth abortion ban does nothing to limit that. It doesn't even limit the ability to do super late-term abortions. It just eliminates this particular kind of late-term abortion. So for Becerra to talk about dilation and extraction abortions more generally is disingenuous. But I think there's also a serious legal question here. One of the weapons that has been utilized by executive branch officials much more commonly in this country, and I kind of, not to sound like a right-wing nut job here, but I kind of blame Barack Obama for this. And this is not just in the abortion context. This is much more broadly with federal law enforcement. The use of the concept of prosecutorial discretion has become much broadened over the last 16 years or so. Barack Obama basically used what is prosecutorial discretion? Yeah. And maybe this is a discussion that'll advance into the next segment. Prosecutorial discretion is when a law enforcement official, an executive branch official, they have leeway as to enforcement of the law. Basically, you don't have to enforce every single law all the time when you're the executive charged with enforcing the law. Okay. Let's say Jonathan is running a shady, illegal pyramid scheme or something, but Jonathan also has terminal cancer and is 6 months away from dying. Am I going to prosecute him full hilt? Well, maybe I'll just decide, look, Jonathan's 6 months away from dying anyway. Let's just not prosecute this.
You'll take away the money, but you won't throw me in jail.
Or whatever. I mean, there's certain, you can make a decision not to charge someone there for certain kinds of prudential reasons. An executive official, whether it's the president as ultimately having oversight for the Securities and Exchange Commission or over other federal regulatory agencies and civil actions, whether it's the county district attorney, whether it's a cop, who maybe a cop's got, the horrible emergency. There's a shooting in downtown Fresno. The cop is flying down 41 to get to downtown Fresno, and he drives past Jonathan Keller, who's looking at his iPhone while in his car.
What?
You're like a horrible criminal in all these scenarios. And
only one of these scenarios is true, fortunately.
Well, yeah. And the cop who's flying down 41 because there's a shooting in downtown Fresno sees Jonathan Keller on his phone and says, I've got bigger fish to fry than Jonathan Keller looking at his phone. I'm going to let that go. He is exercising his prosecutorial discretion.
Yes.
Okay.
Or, John, as another example, to not just a worse situation, maybe you have genuine sympathy for the criminal, like you mentioned before. I think everybody, or hopefully everybody, has maybe if you've been pulled over for a speeding ticket before, or if you've been pulled over by a police officer.
Maybe he gives you a warning.
I have gotten a warning before. I almost fell asleep driving home from Sacramento one time. Yeah. I was exhausted, and I was on 180. I was a couple exits from my house, and I swerved a little bit, and I woke up, and I kept driving.
Yeah.
Well, there's a police officer that had been following me, so he pulled me over, and he goes, "Where are you heading?" And I show him my license, and he goes, "Okay." And I said, "I'm literally like one exit from my house." He says, "Okay, just be safe."
Yeah, exactly.
So that's something that
now what the Obama administration did though was the DACA program, where basically they created a whole new category of immigration on the premise of we're just not going to enforce any immigration law against this whole category, the Dreamer kids, basically children who came to the United States, people who are adults now but came to the United States illegally as children. And through this massive use of, now whether you agree with the goals of that or not, that's a totally different story. The massive use of prosecutorial discretion is making me wonder, is the Biden administration just going to refuse to enforce the partial birth abortion ban? We're going to dig into that question next. This is Right to Life Radio with John Gerardi and Jonathan Keller. This is the Eagles here on Right to Life Radio. This is one of these nights. The Eagles were awesome. Right to Life Radio, John Gerardi and Jonathan Keller. Thank you all so much for joining us. We also want to thank the members of Right to Life of Central California's 300 Club. This show is, of course, brought to you by Right to Life of Central California. The 300 Club is a great way for those of you who aren't winning the $400 million California lottery. For those of you who aren't going to win that, the 300 Club is a great way to support Right to Life for $25 a month, which is $300 in a year. And by doing that, you help support all of our day-to-day operations. So I want to thank a bunch of the people who have joined in the last few months. Antonio Aguirre, Holy Family Catholic Church in Kingsburg, Pat and Linda Mastro, Kurt Bruno, Sarah Coram, Maury DiBenedetto, Tony and Mary Delatorre, Miguel Godia, Mike and Kathy Haynes, Judy Heitney, John and Donna Sloan, Julie Lopez Thurston, Loretta Vinuela, Marianne Belfi, Mike and Leanne Bone. Hey, Mike and Leanne. There we go. Hey. Barbara Fletcher, Jean Floro. Is that Mary Jean Floro? I'm not sure. Vicente and Maria Rios Garza, Nathan Ribb, John Thornton, Richard Ashodian, Angelica Balderas, Johnny and Teresa Dominguez, and Pat Lutz. Thank you all so much for supporting our work. All right, Jonathan. Javier Becerra appeared before a committee of the House of Representatives the other day, and basically, when asked if he was going to enforce the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, got really cagey and said, there's no such thing as partial birth abortion. That's not actually a real term, and there's no legislative language actually dealing with it. And what we're talking about are dilation and extraction abortions that are necessary to protect women late in pregnancy. And he never said if he was going to actually enforce it. And that leads me to fear that the Biden administration is basically not going to enforce this provision of federal criminal law. And I was talking about, this is a big thing, the Obama administration, when they introduced the DACA program, which was basically, and by the way, this is not me at all criticizing the goals of the DACA program one way or another. Right to Life takes no position on it. But what I'm looking at is Barack Obama did this huge executive order, this huge executive action with DACA, and he framed it as something called prosecutorial discretion, basically saying that I, as the chief executive, I who am charged with enforcing the law, basically the way he framed DACA was by saying, I'm just not going to enforce a whole swath of American immigration law against people who came to the United States unlawfully as children. Okay, so I'm not going to deport them. I'm going to give them a kind of legal status by not enforcing existing immigration laws against them. Now, again, I'm not saying anything, people can have diverse opinions about that end goal all they want. What I'm looking at is the way of using prosecutorial discretion to say, I'm just not going to enforce this whole swath of federal law. And lots of people are using prosecutorial discretion in this way. There's this whole wave of usually pretty left-wing district attorneys in the United States who are basically saying, we're not enforcing any kind of drug possession laws anymore. We're not going to enforce various kinds of laws surrounding to low-level drug dealing, certain kinds of prostitution prosecutions. We're just not going to prosecute those kinds of things because of certain kinds of prudential reasons where we think that it's inequitable to enforce those laws.
John, let me give you an example, if I could. I understand that Javier Becerra is a proponent of abortion. He does not like this law. Mm-hmm. But imagine if you had a cop that, in the idea of prosecutorial discretion, let's make it a little more personal, not in terms of, hey, I'm going to allow you some slack on this speeding ticket. But imagine there is a third party involved. Imagine that a cop gets called to a home because it's a suspected domestic violence situation. Mm-hmm. And the neighbors have called, and the cop shows up, and this guy opens the door, and he sees a crying woman behind him with a black eye. Mm-hmm. And the cop goes, so what's going on? And he goes, oh, nothing, we're just having a discussion. And the guy goes, look, man, broads, am I right? Man, you just sometimes, you just got to teach them a lesson. All right, well, you be safe, man. Have a good one.
Right.
If he left and refused to enforce the law, if he engaged in prosecutorial discretion,
this would be an abuse of
it would
prosecutorial
be
discretion.
monstrous and unjust and inhumane.
Right.
And that's basically what we're talking about here.
And so what we're talking about here is Javier Becerra, it sounds like, because he's basically refusing to acknowledge even the existence of the partial birth abortion ban, that maybe he's just deciding, I'm just not going to enforce it. That to whatever extent the Department of HHS has a role in either monitoring or reporting or whatever when it comes to violations of the partial birth abortion ban, maybe Javier Becerra is just not going to enforce it. I mean, he was directly asked, will you enforce it? And just did not really give an answer.
These aren't the laws you're looking for.
This isn't the law you're thinking about. So it's an incredibly disturbing thing. And I'm afraid that basically because of the way that, particularly the left, although both left and right, particularly the ways in which left-wing politicians have been utilizing the concept of prosecutorial discretion to just simply not enforce laws they don't like, I would not be shocked, anyway, to learn that's what's going on here. When we return, we're going to be talking about the topic of physician-assisted suicide, and attempts by the California State Legislature to expand it. That is next on Right to Life Radio. This is the Eagles with Take It Easy. Right to Life Radio. We have 7 women on our minds. Holly, Madeline, Sophia, my wife and children. Holly, Madeline, Sophia, Elizabeth, Julia.
That's 5.
We got 5. Let's throw our moms in there.
Yeah, there you go. Because
that's
right. It was Mother's Day.
Yeah, It was just Mother's Day this past week. Anyway, Right to Life Radio. We have 7 women on our minds, but in the most wholesome way you can fathom.
That's right.
There you go. Also, our girlfriends.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, just kidding. Not girlfriends. They're more mistresses. Anyway, just kidding, folks. Just kidding. Just kidding, Holly. Right to Life Radio.
And Julia. Just kidding, Julia, too.
Well, yeah. Right to Life Radio. The last show we do as married men. All right. Today, we're going to have Jonathan drop his phone really loudly, and then we're going to talk about... Boy, we're just really on a roll at the start of this segment. We're going to talk about physician-assisted suicide. Just because we need a really hopping and happening and exciting and uplifting topic. Physician-assisted suicide. The California State Legislature is considering legislation to expand and loosen up the various, quote, safeguards around physician-assisted suicide. So in order to explain what's happening now, I think a little bit of a refresher course on how the legal regime around physician-assisted suicide actually works in California right now. So California legislature legalized physician-assisted suicide in 2015. And the process for physician-assisted suicide is basically this. You receive from your doctor a terminal diagnosis, a diagnosis that you are going to die within the next 6 months. Now, I'll note that, Jonathan, when a doctor gives you a 6-month terminal diagnosis, generally speaking, this does not mean that at 5 months and 30 days, you're completely fine and 100% healthy, and at 6 months, 0 days, you immediately keel over and fall dead. These are not exact, specific designations of exactly when someone's going to die. These are best faith guesses and estimates.
John, I've been reliably informed by CNN and MSNBC that doctors are never wrong. And even if they contradict their previous public statements,
they are also never wrong.
Yes.
Right, exactly. It's kind of like like certain philosophical conceptions of God, that God can contradict himself, but it's okay because he's God.
Yeah.
No, doctors can be wrong. And doctors will willingly admit that they are wrong. When a doctor gives you a terminal diagnosis, he's not saying, yes, I 100% know with absolute certainty. He's saying, this is my guess, okay? Good, educated guess, but it's a guess. And you can find innumerable examples of people who did not live to their estimated time when they were supposed to die, fell far short of it. And you can find examples of people who lived well past their 6 month or 1 year or whatever it was terminal diagnosis, who outlived it by 20 years. We just don't know. So anyway, you get a 6 month terminal diagnosis. You then qualify for physician-assisted suicide. You then ask a doctor to prescribe you with life-ending pills. That's basically what we're talking about here. It's basically poison to kill yourself. You ask for a prescription for pills. Now, if this doctor is questioning your mental health, then you need to have mental examination, have 2 doctors sign off on your mental health. Now, that's if the doctor prescribing asks for it. If he doesn't ask for it, then you don't need it. It also doesn't matter how many doctors say you don't have a clean bill of health, as long as 2 say that you do. So I can have 10 doctors say that I'm clinically depressed and not in the right state of mind to do it. As long as 2 say I'm okay, that's fine. Now, it's also quite odd how few of these mental health examinations are being ordered for patients seeking physician-assisted suicide when the rates of depression among terminally ill patients are astronomically high. Like clinically diagnosable depression, not just I feel depressed, right?
Well, and John, you have to think that in any other situation, if someone says that they want to kill themselves, if someone has a really bad day at work, if someone has a really difficult relationship breakup, if someone has...
the fact that they say that they want to kill themselves is a sign, is itself a symptom of that triggers a mental health investigation or some kind of, some kind of action.
We have a whole colloquial term, when at least in the state of California, it's, so-and-so's on a 5150 hold. And that is it's a term in the psychiatric mental health establishment. If you get 5150'd, it means that you are being restrained. You're being held against your will. You're basically being imprisoned because you could be a danger to yourself or to others.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, there's no need to do that. If the alternative, it's amazing to think that if someone called a suicide hotline and they said, I'm feeling really depressed, I'm thinking of ending it all, they said, oh, all right, well, here's what you do. Let me give you some tips.
We would immediately spring into action. All of the levers of the state would be at our disposal to help someone. But in the case of physician-assisted suicide, if someone has a 6 month terminal diagnosis and does it through this legal process, then, we'll help you kill yourself. So, but these were the supposed safeguards that it has to be, and the proponents of physician-assisted suicide, they're always going in this incremental way. So it starts with, it's only physician-assisted suicide. It's not euthanasia. It's not a doctor directly killing you. It's a doctor prescribing you medication so you can end your own life. So that's allegedly a safeguard. Then no doctor's going to be forced to participate who doesn't want to participate. That's allegedly a safeguard. Mental health examination is open. That's allegedly a safeguard. It's not much of a safeguard. So this is an assessment of Senate Bill 380. This is an assessment from the Patients' Rights Council. When the existing End of Life Option Act was passed, its proponents said that it contained, quote, safeguards. Now those proponents are attempting to amend that law, referring to some of those existing, quote, safeguards as barriers In fact, in any state where such a law has been passed, there is no way to know what happens after the prescription of a lethal drug overdose is filled. The expansion of the existing California End-of-Life Option Act bill is based on an inaccurate claim that the current law is too restrictive and that the Oregon law on which it was based has been free of abuse. Now, this is the other important thing, the notion of abuse. You may ask, well, how do we know that, maybe nephew Clem, who's going to inherit the family farm, that maybe he's unduly influencing, Grandpa Zed to take the life-ending medication? It's also a thing, you just get a bottle of pills when you get the prescription. You can choose not to take them. Many people choose not to.
You don't have to take them in the presence of a doctor the moment you get them.
Exactly, and that's the other big thing. You take them on your time without any kind of physician watching you, any kind of healthcare professional watching you. You don't take it at a clinic. You can take it in your bath. You can take it in your bed. You can take it while staring at the Grand Canyon. It does not matter. You can take this medication wherever you want.
Well, John, but you have to keep it under lock and key, right? I mean, surely you can't allow a third party to have access to these.
Well, exactly. There's no restrictions on the actual pills themselves. They can be hanging in your medicine closet. And you can also take the pills in the same room as your nephew Clem, who's going to inherit the family farm after you die. So
Clem doesn't seem like a good guy in this scenario.
Clem is a very bad guy. Very bad. Does not actually care about his Uncle Zed, just wants the money. So now, here's the thing. Uncle Zed dies. Clem was in the room. Seems like maybe fishy circumstances. Did Clem shove it down Uncle Zed's throat? Did he shove the life-ending medication down his throat? Was it actually physician-assisted suicide? Or maybe did Clem try to murder this old geezer? Well, here's the other big problem. The physician-assisted suicide law in California forces doctors to lie on the death certificate. Let's remember, the triggering event that allows you to qualify for physician-assisted suicide is some underlying health condition for which you have a 6-month terminal diagnosis. So let's say that Uncle Zed has cancer. He has a 6-month terminal diagnosis. He gets the life-ending medication. Regardless of the suspicious circumstances under which he and cousin Clem were in the room at the same time, Clem's likelihood to inherit the estate, they were in the room at the same time, he took the medication, everyone's a little suspicious about Clem. Because you write on the death certificate, what do you write on the death certificate as Uncle Zed's cause of death? You don't write physician-assisted suicide pills. You write cancer. Not the thing that actually killed him, which was the assisted suicide pills. You write cancer, the underlying health condition that allowed him to qualify for physician-assisted suicide. So guess what? There's no cause for triggering an autopsy. So one of the big things that proponents of physician-assisted suicide have done, and this is the same in California as it is in Oregon and states that have had physician-assisted suicide for longer times. Oregon has had physician-assisted suicide since the 90s. And when it was being introduced in California, people kept saying there's no evidence of any kind of abuse in the Oregon system. No evidence of anyone, being coerced into taking it or someone trying to inherit or shady dealing, whatever. Well, yeah, there's no evidence of it. You don't have any means of reporting shady dealing. You don't have any means of catching someone engaging in the shady dealing. You can take the physician-assisted suicide pills at home. You don't take them in the presence of a physician.
And in most cases, John, the primary witness who could testify to wrongdoing is dead.
Exactly. In fact, all situations in every situation that the primary witness who could testify to wrongdoing, in all of those situations, that person is dead. So, anyway, as with Oregon's law, California's existing law does not provide any means to investigate problems or abuse. SB 380, this new legislation before the state Senate, would permit a prescription for lethal drugs to be provided within less than a week after a patient has been diagnosed with a terminal disease. The bill would do away with the requirement that a person requesting the assisted suicide drugs make 2 oral requests, at least 15 days apart, followed by a written request. The amended expansion bill would permit a prescription for the drugs to be provided after a person makes 2 oral requests 48 hours apart and a written request. So instead of it being like a 2.5 week long process, it's a 2-day process. SB 380 will require that doctors who are unable or unwilling to provide patients with the drugs to end their lives must inform the patients of their right to transfer care to a willing provider. That's another thing, basically forcing doctors who don't want to participate, forcing them to refer. And that's a huge thing. Doctors who are pro-life don't want to refer. They don't want to have to refer someone for physician-assisted suicide. If a patient requests the drugs to cause death after being diagnosed with a terminal disease, but the doctor is unable or unwilling to prescribe the lethal overdose, the patient may request their information, including their diagnosis, requests, and documented date of the requests. The requests and relevant information must be transferred to a willing provider. Such referrals have been made under the existing law. So there's all kinds of problems with this expansion. First of all, this notion that we have all these safeguards, but now we're knocking these safeguards down. And the safeguards were overblown to begin with. Secondly, the slow creep infringing on the conscience rights of doctors who don't want to be part, who don't want to have anything to do with physician-assisted suicide. This is the second big threat to SB 380. So it's a dangerous, slippery slope, and that's the real severe, and even worse than that, the existing bill for physician-assisted suicide, it had a sunset clause. It was going to sunset in January of 2026. This new bill, SB 380, eliminates the sunset clause. Now, when we return, we're going to talk about some of the perverse economic incentives that are built into the legalization of physician-assisted suicide, all of the other various bad stuff that comes out of physician-assisted suicide. That is next, right here on Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 AM 1400. John Gerardi and Jonathan Keller for Right to Life of Central California. This is the Eagles again. This is Johnny Come Lately, the new kid in town. The Eagles are awesome. Are they not? Gosh, just fantastic.
Now, John, I'm admitting my ignorance, but they are many of them still around, alive? Do they tour at all, or are they totally?
I think so. I don't think they tour very much. I think many of them are alive. I'll admit my own kind of ignorance. I really like the Eagles, and it's a thing where I don't really listen to them much, and then I hear an Eagles song, and I think, you know what? I should listen to the Eagles more. These guys were great. But yeah, they were a pretty, in spite of their cool demeanor, they were actually a pretty rough and tumble crew. They were pretty. They famously were totally brilliant and got in tons of arguments with each other and never really got along. So anyway,
is that kind of like
how you're
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, or like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers? They just kind of strike me as just like laid back, low key. Meh.
It's kind of like in Marvel Comics how sometimes Captain America and Iron Man would always fight with each other because they're just two alpha males. So anyway,
that makes sense.
That'll do it. Right
like
to Life
Dumbledore
Radio.
and Gandalf.
Yeah, Right to Life Radio, doing inside jokes on the radio. Okay, I want to close the show by talking about a little bit about physician-assisted suicide. And there's a lot to oppose with physician-assisted suicide, as the state legislature promotes Senate Bill 380, which will take away various kinds of safeguards around physician-assisted suicide, start to force doctors who don't want to participate through referrals in physician-assisted suicide. And there's a lot to oppose in physician-assisted suicide. The nature of suicide itself as being an inherently, intrinsically immoral thing, the taking of innocent human life in any capacity, even when it's one taking one's own life, is a grievous wrong against both society and against oneself. There are all kinds of wrongs with physician-assisted suicide. The uncertainty of a 6-month terminal diagnosis being the basis for assisted suicide. One of the major problems with assisted suicide are the perverse financial incentives that it places on people. Assisted suicide is cheap. It is not expensive. It's a bottle of pills. It's a bottle of pills that are not exactly particularly complicated.
Well, John, this was literally one of the concerns from Oregon, was that we heard.
Whoa. Unplug and replug.
This was
no.
This. Check one.
No.
Check.
No.
Check.
Hey, there we go. Okay.
Sentence there, but we need to fix the time.
Okay. Let's bring it back to like 3 minutes. Whoa. Go back to 3 minutes. Yeah, I think so.
All right. So, John, like you were saying, the whole idea of it being cheaper, we heard horror stories about this from Oregon, where patients who were prescribed assisted suicide drugs were prescribed them sometimes not even by their request, but in lieu of other treatment.
Right.
A woman who was diagnosed with terminal cancer, her insurance company wrote back and said, well, we're not going to pay for your cancer treatment, but here's a bottle of assisted suicide pills. Have you perhaps considered?
Right.
Kill me now.
By the way, let it not shock people that insurance companies like keeping money. They don't like, what they like is when people spend a lot of money in health insurance premiums, et cetera, and then don't use as much. Like, so when they don't use chemotherapy and don't use expensive services, that's better for insurance companies. So what do you think an insurance company wants more? Those of you out there maybe who are, anti-capitalist liberals out there who are also pro-choice and in favor of assisted suicide, what do you think insurance companies want more? Legalize assisted suicide so that poor people can kill themselves cheaply, or people using expensive resources towards the end of their life, like chemotherapy, things like that? Obviously, there is a perverse incentive built into the legal regime for assisted suicide for people to kill themselves cheaply rather than to stay alive expensively. And especially for this was the super obnoxious thing in the signing statement that Jerry Brown issued when he legalized assisted suicide in 2015, was he said, well, I looked on my life and I want to have every option open to me when I'm near the end. Which is like, all right, first of all, Jerry Brown, you're going to have access to Cadillac quality healthcare no matter what. You have no financial worries, okay? There's nothing for you ever to worry about again when it comes to finances and having good healthcare towards the end of your life. So you can talk from this position of privilege about, oh, I want every option open. But when you're a poor person who is choosing between, okay, am I going to put considerable financial strain on my family by pursuing palliative care or by pursuing cancer versus, oh, hey, here's physician-assisted suicide available over here for super cheap. That's a totally different conversation. It's a completely different thing from the privileged posture of Jerry Brown from his deathbed saying, oh, I'd like to have every option open to me when I'm near the end. Well, there we go. At least Dean Martin can sort of talk about the good life for us as we close out the show with the
Not
old
the
Italian
artificially
man.
shortened life.
Not the artificially shortened life. No. Anyway, so oppose SB 380. Encourage your state legislators to vote no on it. Thank you for listening to Right to Life Radio, and we'll see you next week. God bless.